Get some analysis now from James Dorsey, who's an adjunct senior fellow at Rajaratnam School of International Studies. He joins me live now from Singapore. It's an absolute pleasure speaking to you today, sir. First off, let me get your thoughts on this attack in Lebanon and hearing the statements from officials and the lack of statements, for that matter, being made from certain officials. What does that tell us about where everyone stands in the current political climate?
Well, I think that we need to look at three areas in terms of the fallout of what happened in Lebanon. One is what happens on the Lebanese-Israeli border. With other words, what effect this will have in terms of the low-intensity war that we've been seeing between Hezbollah and Israel for almost a year. The second area we need to look at is what impact this will have on the ceasefire negotiations. And the third area is one that is as yet unexplored, and that is what this means in terms of levels of surveillance technology, as well as new arenas of warfare, and what that may require. Corresponding to what your correspondent in Moscow was saying, it's not just an investigation that is needed; it's regulation and international law that is needed.
Right, and now that although Israel didn't claim responsibility for this attack was conducted after Netanyahu had said that he wanted residents to return to northern Israel. The U.S. says that they need more information, but advises against escalating the conflict. How much leverage do you think that the U.S. currently has to ensure that this doesn't spiral out of control?
Well, the United States at least has not shown how much leverage it may have throughout the Gaza war conflict. It was very clear when Adam Hochstein, the President Joe Biden's envoy, was in Israel this week, in which he clearly said the United States believed that the way to get the evacuees in Israel, but also in Lebanon, back to their homes on the border is only through a diplomatic negotiation. Netanyahu's response was that Israel will do what it deems to be necessary. Now, the other question, of course, is that Netanyahu may not have been referring in what he said to Hochstein to what happened in Lebanon yesterday. It may very well that external circumstances, in a sense, forced Israel's hand. With other words, Israel used this weapon earlier than it may have wanted to.
Indeed. The second element you had mentioned, the ceasefire negotiations, we do know that Blinken is currently in Cairo aiming at reviving these ceasefire negotiations, and he said that they need to see political will from both Hamas and Israel to reach an agreement, while his Egyptian counterpart said that Hamas has already committed to the proposals that have been put on the table, particularly on May the 27th and July the 2nd. What do you think has been the prime reason behind this deal not materializing so far?
I think that few people have any doubt that the major obstacle to the ceasefire agreement is Benjamin Netanyahu. Now, that is not to say that what happened in Lebanon yesterday and what the fallout will be, particularly if Hezbollah strikes back soon and strikes back hard, that potentially could stiffen Hamas's position in the ceasefire negotiations. But at the bottom line, certainly until yesterday, I think most people would agree that Netanyahu was the major problem.
Right, and the third element you mentioned, surveillance technology and regulation on surveillance technology. I mean, this has opened a can of worms and conversations that need to be had openly by government officials to go down that path to regulate this very topic. I mean, what do you think is going to happen moving forward in terms of regulating that front following this attack that we've witnessed in Lebanon?
I think the experience, if you go throughout recent history, certainly 20th century history, of getting to international agreement, to getting to convents, to translating that into international law, is a slow and grinding process. I think the threat here is that this is a kind of attack that really crosses the borders of or blurs the borders between what are military targets and what are civilian targets, and how do you ensure that only military targets, with other words, personnel from an enemy force, are targeted. It's a can of worms, much like the whole issue of surveillance. and mobile phones is a can of worms. And it's not something that is going to be resolved and regulated anytime soon, even if it should.
All right, I want to circle back to your first element, what this means for the low intensity war between Israel and Hezbollah. I mean, a lot of people are saying we're on the brink of a widening conflict here following this attack. We do know that Israel has deployed now its 98th division of its army to the border there. That makes up approximately 10,000 to 20,000 troops. I mean, are we on the brink of a widening conflict here?
I don't think anybody knows except for the decision makers. So, with other words, we don't know what the purpose of this attack was. There are those who believe, and that could very well be true, that this is the prelude to an Israeli attack on Hezbollah on a larger scale. We don't know how Hezbollah, first of all, we don't know how Hezbollah has been affected in terms of its capabilities and command and control. And so to what degree and how it can and will respond to this attack. So there are too many unknowns here to know. There's no doubt that this heightens the risks of a wider conflict in the Middle East. Keep in mind that if you got a full-fledged war into between Hezbollah and Israel, this would put a lot of pressure on the Iranians, who until now have been restrained, certainly restrained in terms of their response to the killing of Hamas leader Ismail Haniyeh in Tehran on July 31. The difference, of course, between Lebanon and Gaza is that in Lebanon, it's much easier and therefore greater pressure on Iran to supply and support Hezbollah, whereas it doesn't have that kind of access to Hamas in Gaza.
Indeed. James Dorsey, thank you so much for being with me here on the NewsHour and sharing that analysis with us. I appreciate it.
Efran, my pleasure. Thank you.